Welcome back. Today is Wednesday, May 20th, and we're catching up on a couple weeks of news since we last spoke at you. And I think first, Kristen, I will just take over and start with the Washoe RTC. I don't think anybody covered this, but they're going to be raising their prices. They've sort of streamlined their ridership offerings and benefits and so on and so forth. But what's going to be happening in the next couple of years is essentially RTC Access is going to go from $3 per ride to $4. And senior mobility applications will qualify at age 65 as opposed to age 60. I was really looking forward to, in a few years, taking advantage of that. Now I'm going to have to wait almost a decade.
You're just going to have to keep riding your bike.
Yeah, probably should do that anyway. There's also going to be a new copay. So if you're a higher income earner, you're going to have to pay 25% on some of these benefits. I believe that was for the Uber or Lyft rides. So essentially expect some changes in the next couple of years. We were told that, or rather the commission did say that they would not implement these changes without more public hearings as we get closer to those times when they're going to be approved. So this is their 5-year plan. It's called the, what do they call it? The Move More plan. So they're tweaking things as RTC always does. And essentially what I think the big issue that came out of that meeting, and I believe this was on Friday of last week, is that there are going to be some fee hikes and some benefit reductions, particularly for older adults. And I want to also,
I want to point out that the title of the program, Move More, actually sounds like they want you to walk or ride a bike. Because when I hear move more, I think of exercising and get off your lazy butt. So whoever came up with that title for transit didn't really think it through, I think. I would recommend that they change that.
They will be moving more buses and people around because they're expecting ridership increases over the next few years. I believe as much as 3 to 5%, if I recall correctly. So they will be moving more people.
Yeah. And, if gas prices stay elevated, I think we're going to see a lot more people using transit. And I think they're already seeing bumps in, micromobility with like scooter rentals and e-bikes and that sort of thing. So I don't doubt that transit use will increase.
By the way, I was not prepared to even talk about this, but there is going to be a upcoming potential ballot initiative to raise road use fees for hybrids and EVs. Remember, we reported on that about a year ago, I want to say.
Yeah, Washoe County talked about that at one of their commission meetings, that the need
it was RTC.
To pay more in taxes, have those cars have to pay more in registration to offset the fact that they're not using gas.
If you have an EV, get prepared to pay more eventually. I want to also add that what else happened at that meeting is that the director of RTC got another glowing review from the RTC board. He was up for a 5% salary increase, and instead got an 8% increase. Commissioner Alexis Hill made that motion to approve his salary increase before he retires in October. So he went from 5% to 8%, unsolicited, unannounced, and there we go. There's more we have to pay.
I find that just surprising, ridiculous even, because in the current economic situation that we are all facing, and I know that, the extra 3% that he's going to get is not going, it's a drop in the bucket compared to what we need to spend on transit and our roads. But at the same time, the optics of it, I think, are terrible, that this person is getting an 8% pay increase when he's retiring in a few months. And it's more, that's like Reno Police Department pay increase. It's kind of, I guess, typical CEO kind of crap. And I find it really interesting that Alexis Hill, who is running for Nevada governor on a progressive platform and for the people, is saying, hey, let's reimburse CEOs even more while everyone else is struggling. And to be hiking fees on seniors while simultaneously giving more money to the CEO who isn't going to be there long term. This is not a retention bonus. This is not a pay raise intended to retain him. It's just asinine.
You know, I've always said that a lot of Democrats with lofty ideals kind of fall short when they do things like that. And yes, that's about all I'm going to say on that matter. Other than to say that the optics of it were quite interesting, especially given the fact that I don't believe any other news media will be covering this story or even mentioning it. So they're allowed to get away with it. I think it was about 10 years ago when we heard about the rise of social media algorithms essentially deplatforming news and people trying to do more objective reporting in favor of rage bait and influencers and things like that, which is now where I think a lot of people or more people are getting their information. And this is really the consequence of it, is that you don't have people watchdogging local governments for little things like this that in the big picture probably should be more than just little things.
Yeah.
Speaking of big things and little things.
Speaking of big things, there's a big development that was approved on an appeal down south of Pleasant Valley in kind of North Washoe Valley, the Sierra Reflections Project. And it raised a ton of complaints when it went up. Oh, yeah.
It was hundreds of residents that do not want this.
Yeah, they had at the time they had about 1,600 people signed on in opposition to this project, and they now have over 2,000 people signed on in opposition. It's moving forward, but it still has another obstacle to kind of overcome before it can really pick up any steam on forward progress, and that is the Truckee Meadows Regional Planning Commission. It's a project of regional significance, which means that it has extra layers of approvals to go through. And those 2,000 citizens, I don't know if they'll all show up. They are hoping to shatter attendance records at the the Truckee Meadows Planning Commission or Regional Planning Commission meeting. So we'll see how many people they can fit in the room. But these homeowners are really upset. And, you know, on one hand, I can see why they're upset, because they don't want more traffic. They don't want more houses in their backyard. They want things to stay the way they are. And
they don't want dust with mercury in it.
Yeah, they also don't want dust with mercury being kicked up all over their neighborhood.
Which is what may happen. They're going to have to water that dust down quite a bit, I'm told.
Yes, that could happen. The health district has done studies. They have a whole plan in place. It's gone through numerous approvals. So really, they are looking at every opportunity to stop this development. They have filed a lawsuit. They have filed an open meeting law complaint alleging that there was a $1 million agreed upon payment from the developer to the county that wasn't included on an agenda. It wasn't included on the agenda, so it was an amendment to the motion to reverse the appeal, and it wasn't agendized. And so they're saying that that's an open meeting law complaint. And then in addition to that, they are saying that the 3 Washoe County commissioners, Alexis Hill, Mary Luz Garcia, and Clara Andriola, who approved the reversal of the denial, and is allowing this to move forward, that they have ethics violations for accepting campaign contributions from developers and consultants involved in the project, and then approving for the project to proceed. And I actually just a week or two ago participated in an online training with the Nevada Commission on Ethics related to campaigns and campaign finance and ethical violations. And from what I have learned in my brief training and extensive coverage on ethics complaints in the state, I don't see an ethical violation here.
They would have to disclose, every sitting politician in the state would have to disclose every time they voted for something related to somebody who gave them money, which for some of these big money candidates like Alexis Hill would mean constant disclosures, I would venture to guess.
I think
it's impractical.
It's absolutely impractical, but I think the other point is that they're not necessarily benefiting. They benefit from the contributions, yes, but I guess what the complaints are alleging is a sort of quid pro quo of you contribute to my campaign and I'll approve your projects. That's quite an accusation. I don't know how you could prove that necessarily. And again, as we live in Northern Nevada, this is basically what we all see all the time. And yes, we need to hold our elected officials to be more accountable, which we call out those donations every time we run a story like this. We call out.
Yeah, that's our job. I don't think the Ethics Commission is going to touch these.
Yeah, I don't think the Ethics Commission is going to touch it. But these homeowners are looking for every single avenue that they can to keep this development from happening. If I had to choose between what Sierra Reflections is presenting now with equestrian trails and walking trails and parks and actually fewer homes, fewer acres being taken up by housing versus what they were proposing a decade ago, I think that the current iteration of this development is far better than what it was.
Not to mention at the pace that the AG's office processes open meeting law complaints, they'll be spraying that mercury dust before we get a response back to this open meeting law violation complaint.
Yes.
I only partially joke. File an open meeting law complaint if you don't believe me, though. Yeah, I don't think those are going to go very far. We see this a lot with developments. It's really a matter of, I think, commissioners and planning staff at the various agencies trying to work with developers to make sure these projects are feasible and, match community needs to the best of their ability. But at the end of the day, I think we have a development, a culture that's ripe with development in Northern Nevada for the past 10 plus years, particularly as we clawed our way out of the recession. And that's just the fact of life. I mean, people have been saying for years, you're not going to recognize this valley in about 15, 20 years.
Yeah.
We have a new police chief recently announced.
Just got an email today that he was approved.
He was approved by the Reno City Council. You were gone, Kristen, so I took liberties with the editorial this week, and I accused the city of basing their decisions and their messaging on optics as opposed to sound policy. I don't think you would disagree with that.
I would not.
Okay. I know I get in trouble for what you call thinking without supervision, but I think I did okay while you were gone. Corey,
the thing I think is interesting, you were going to say Corey Solferino has been named Reno Police Chief. The thing I think is interesting is this is the second time in, 2 weeks that the leader of an organization that affects the bulk of the community has been selected and appointed without any sort of interview process. Last week, it was Tiffany McMaster as the new superintendent of Washoe County School District. And now we have a Reno chief of police. Neither of them went through any sort of job search. The interview process for McMaster was brief and uncompetitive. And Solferino's interview process was basically trial by fire, do the job. Oh, it looks great, and we'll hire you. So I'm not sure if this is the new trend, but I don't think it sets a good precedent.
I think reading between the lines at that press conference where they announced that Chief Nance and her two command staff people, Anthony Elgis and Oliver Miller, were fired, which, by the way, is part of why I called out the optics issue, is because back in March when it was announced that these folks were going to be under investigation, well, she didn't even name them. But now all of a sudden we get names and we get kind of a hint at, that they're under investigation and why. It was an interesting sort of course reversal in terms of the messaging there. And I was glad that they finally named names. I mean, it's been a long time coming. We already knew that months ago, or a month plus ago. And I get in government, you can't really theoretically talk about personnel issues, supposedly. We've seen it happen in the past with other agencies, and no negative pushback has come forward as a result of those particular instances. So I'm always a little surprised when people still say, well, it's a personnel issue, we can't comment. Well, cite that NRS. I'm not sure that exists, but maybe there's some sound legal reason that I'm not aware of, but I've seen that violated more than once. And it seems to me they're just making a decision not to say anything, as evidenced by announcing that this was an investigation, not naming names, and then now saying, we're going to name names and Corey Solferino is going to be the next chief of police. That all came under the backdrop of a retired police officer by the name of Gabe Smith going on I don't even know what kind of podcast this was. It seemed like a police or a kind of a bro podcast or something, but he went on there, I guess recently retired as of maybe the last few weeks.
And the day he did the interview was his last day on the job.
Remember what we've talked about, people with one foot out the door and how candid and refreshingly honest they can be?
Absolutely.
This guy was very honest, and he said that there was a SWAT team member who was on meth. People knew about it.
Who was taking meth. He was pulling people over, taking their meth, and then letting them go, and then using the meth.
According to this officer who retired, he raised the concern about the meth and in turn was gaslit in response. And he basically said that the culture of RPD is one of essentially corruption and political favoritism. And something that we have been pointing out for many years is that it's really being driven at the top. This is all politics that stems from the whims of the mayor and the city council and presumably the city manager who's carrying the water for the council. Interesting interview. You should go find it. Officer Gabe Smith. It's on YouTube. I forget the name of the podcast, but it's gotten a lot of views. It's gotten a lot of attention. And it's a refreshing look at what actually happens within local police work. He also weighed in on what he called the falsification of training records, which is what we spoke about at length in our last podcast.
Yeah. He talked a little bit about how the training that a lot of officers get isn't worthwhile and that it is half-assed. And he talked about how having more experience, he talks about how he joined the police force later in life. He didn't hop out of high school, turn 21, and then join the police force. He did a bunch of other things.
He came from homelessness.
Yeah, he was homeless. He had a drug problem. He was in the military. He had a lot of other things going on. And so he has this lived experience, but then he became a police officer. And he was talking about how he wanted to make sure that he was up for the job physically. And so he participated in like jujitsu. He talked a lot about jujitsu and self-defense so that, when he was faced with a situation that needed physical intervention, he didn't hesitate. He knew he had the skills. And he talked about how training requirements for the Reno police don't require that. They don't require really a police officer to have those sorts of skills. And so a lot of officers, he said, are unprepared for confrontation. And that's why you see situations where they're afraid to use their taser. They feel more comfortable using their gun because they aren't confident about their ability to defend themselves in certain situations without using a gun. And we had gotten a call, it was months ago. I had gotten a note from someone saying that I needed to look into the number of Reno police officers having the city pay for them to do martial arts training and jujitsu. And I thought, well, that sounds weird that we're paying for them to do hobbies that they're writing off as training. But following Smith's conversation, I thought, well, that makes sense. And so now I think I'd like to learn a little bit more about that because he sounded really reasonable about it. But of course, he's a cop. So he's going to justify why he was doing that. But I'm hoping I put in a public records request for that training in March. The city.
How many more months do you have to wait?
The city emailed me last week and said that they need to do more research. So it's been about 2 months now since I've been waiting for those records. And I think it's going to go for at least another month waiting, which again is horrifying that the city can't find training records for their police department. It's taking months of research to come up with this. This is not a resounding message of confidence that I'm receiving.
Well, in fairness, the City of Reno Attorney's Office is extremely hostile toward producing actual public records, as evidenced by how many times we've sued them. We still have one case pending, by the way, recently refiled, waiting for more than a year. Yeah. Okay. Shall we move forward with our agenda item?
Yeah. So this week, yesterday spent multiple hours listening to the Washoe County Board of County Commissioners meeting. It was a very short agenda with a lot of discussion. They had a review of the final budget for fiscal year 2027, which starts July 1st. In April, they approved a tentative budget. That has to go through the state, get approval, and then they make any last-minute changes. The county commissioners approve it, and then that final budget has to be delivered to the state by June 1st. And it's accompanied by a 5-year capital improvement plan. And there weren't really a lot of changes to that budget since April. They are, I think the net decrease in full-time equivalent employees in the general fund is about 2.78 is what they said. So the way they calculate a full-time equivalent position, you get fractions of people. But basically, they have fewer staff. They've eliminated staff positions. So basically, you can't hire somebody for a position that doesn't exist. So that's one of the ways that they have reduced costs. But they have about a 6.8% increase in revenues and a 6% decrease in spending, I think is about how that looks, or 6%.
But they're still not catching up, right?
They're having a hard time catching up. This is the last year, I think, that I think it's only going to get harder from here on out with the budget. Mike Clark was really concerned about the fact that, so one of the things that Lori Cook, the budget director, presented was this chart of the number of employees that Washoe County has had. And she started with 2008 because that was the last year. That was kind of the peak year of employment for the county. And then the Great Recession happened and the number of employees just dipped and it has never fully gone back to what it was in 2008. And so while that has been happening, of course, our population has been growing. And so the number of people served for every one county employee, the number of people in the community served has increased. So that ratio has changed. And so that means that county employees are doing more. It's like an increase in productivity, and they've figured out ways to streamline. You'll hear this a lot at county meetings, that employees are streamlining processes and finding better ways to do things and working collaboratively together so that they can eliminate overlap. And Mike Clark's question was, at what point do we hit the reality of the fact that we can't squeeze any more juice out of these oranges? You know, these employees are working at their capacity, and we're getting tools such as, you know, Madison AI, which is this big AI tool that the county actually helped develop and is now not really probably getting paid for it like they should. But that's another story that we'll cover in the future.
Are they not making up their workload with AI? That's
They
my
are.
first
So
question. They
this
are.
Madison
Okay.
AI is one of the things that's helping reduce the workload. And
Mhm.
I think Abby Coben, the chief financial officer, said we can't outrun our labor concerns with technology, meaning that AI is a solution right now and it is helping to increase productivity. But at a certain point, those increases will stop and they will need to hire more employees, and they have to find budget to do that. And
Yeah.
that's the point at when they're really going to hit the crunch. And I think that that is going to be coming. But for now, they are bumping along. And I think one of the things in the capital improvement plan that, you know, those things don't stop. The county has budget concerns, but they also have to maintain everything and can continue with projects that they've been working on. They can't just stop fixing roads because they don't have a lot of money. And so they're looking at, I think it was about $8 million that they're putting into slurry sealing the roads so that they can last longer. And the goal for the county isn't to fix roads, it's to keep the roads from deteriorating further. It's not
Even
making things
worse.
better. It's just, let's not make them worse. And
One
so,
thing in
yeah.
one thing in your report that I was fascinated by is that they mentioned, I believe it was sewer and something else, where they can recover costs. But if a new development goes in, for example, the roads to get into that development and out of it, while the development may ultimately pay for that to get constructed, we pay for the maintenance and wear on it.
Yes. Yeah. So basically, when they say that development pays for the development, yes, developers pay to build the roads and build the sewers in the developments that they create. But then those roads and sewers get turned over to the county or the city or whatever jurisdiction they're in. And it's that jurisdiction's responsibility to maintain them and to keep things running and repair them when they need repairs. And so that's what the county is saying is, you know, and this is why I think infill is so important, is because the infrastructure is already there. When you are building further out, you have to bring infrastructure to that further out development, which means that the development costs more because the developer has to pay for all that infrastructure improvement. And then it costs the county more because they then have that much more, you know, feet or miles of sewer line and sidewalks or culverts and streets that they need to maintain.
It is kind of a race against, you know, what is needed versus what the tax base can support. And so we're going to start, I think, in Washoe County, if I read the tea leaves correctly, things are going to start looking like New Orleans streets and sidewalks sooner or later.
We do not want any Bourbon Street juice on our sidewalks.
Oh, it's going to be amazing. Yeah.
You know, Bob, another interesting adjacent story to this I reported on last week at the county meeting, and that is another component of the development code updates that the county has been working on. When Kat Oakley comes to the podium and starts talking about these code changes, she's so well prepared. She's got all of this data, you know, looking at what are the housing needs that we're going to have in the future. And she's looking at, you know, how are people living? how are households operating? They are operating as older people trying to keep a roof over their head. They're first-time home buyers. People aren't having kids, so there's smaller family units. And she's looking at projections of how many more, seniors we're going to have in the community, and do we have the housing to actually accommodate them? And so this last round of development code changes that she presented and that were approved and embraced was incentives, basically density incentives for single family homes that are smaller in size. So, for example, a house now is going to be built and it's 2,000 square feet and it's got a 2-car garage on a quarter of an acre. And you're allowed to have, I don't know, depends on the zoning, say 8 of those per acre or what have you, or 6 of them per acre, whatever. And they're looking at offering a bonus, a 25% bonus, where the home builder can build more of those homes if they keep the square footage under 1,200 square feet. And that really is making a smaller home with potentially a 1-car garage that is going to accommodate an aging senior or a smaller family or a single person, first-time home buyers. I mean, I know that when I purchased my first home, it was in the old Northwest. It was built in the 50s when they still built starter homes. It was a 900 square foot house with a 1-car garage, and it was absolutely adequate for my needs as a first-time home buyer. And houses like that just aren't built anymore. And so the county is actually moving this code forward that's going to incentivize developers to stop building these behemoth houses that have all these extra things and build smaller properties. And I think one thing that's interesting is she said that the more houses with a smaller footprint actually are going to have less building bulk than fewer houses with larger footprints. So the actual space that those houses take up in the air is going to be less with more smaller houses than fewer big houses.
We don't have pods yet like they do in Japan and Honolulu.
We're not there yet.
But I know you don't live in the area presently, Kristen, but these, I call them soulless structures that are being built all over the valley. They don't look good, in my opinion. They're very homogeneous looking. They look cheap, frankly. And I know that it is developers trying to make these projects pencil out to get as many people as they can into a acre lot. And it's has the unfortunate side effect or unintended consequence of just not looking that great. And the amount of traffic increases in these areas as well, like South Reno. It's just insane.
Yeah.
So next time you're in town, we'll drive around and I'll show you. Meantime, we struggle with the Lear. Shall we move on?
Yeah.
Well, the city of Reno did make the step to put a temporary moratorium on data center applications, which I don't believe they even had any pending. So it was sort of like a symbolic gesture, perhaps. And it's only, I believe, until they can schedule their next meeting to discuss the issue on a more permanent basis, or if there's specific development guidelines for data centers, then perhaps that will get developed. But essentially, it was a day-long meeting. There was dozens of public comments. Most everyone was against it, except for people in industry and union representatives and people from the unions themselves who were speaking in favor.
Doug Thornley there again?
I don't recall seeing him, but most people wanted the moratorium and they want it to be permanent. There were some folks talking about this Keystone data center being built in almost their backyard and how horrifying that is for them. And so there's a lot of concern and worry. But Michelle Baker was there. She covered the protest before the meeting that was at City Plaza, as well as the meeting itself. And we'll play that video now.
If we can get a strict ordinance on the books and make sure that our community has a public opportunity for engagement. Every time a data center wants to come here, we can push back.
Today we're here at Reno City Council because City Council is discussing a temporary moratorium on new data centers coming within Reno city limits.
We're seeing it across the country where we have utility companies starting to throttle their customers over data centers.
We're the most impacted when it comes to climate change impacts, and also when we're thinking about data centers. These are all indigenous homelands, and our homelands are being targeted for data center development.
Well, I say here, life over data. Like Autumn said, water is life. If we have no water, we have no life.
What Sierra Club Toyabe chapter is really concerned about is a moratorium with an arbitrary end date. So we're asking City Council to develop robust regulations to protect our natural resources and communities here in Reno from the very real threats of data centers, and to do that and adopt those policies before the moratorium ends.
A blanket moratorium is the wrong tool. Data centers bring high-paying construction jobs. In fact, 80% of union electricians in Northern Nevada right now are working on data centers.
A lot of our members actually do work at these facilities, data centers. They have insurance, they put their kids to school, they put food on their tables.
I'm concerned about the environment, obviously. I live in this community, and that's very concerning to me to have good water and good air and everything like that. But I ultimately believe that with technology advancing, we will come up with better means of being able to control the pollution and everything that comes from it.
We lived and cherished and still do the resources and the animals and whatever else comes with that responsibility. We tended to it for thousands of years.
I want a family and I want a life here in this state. And I fear that with the rise of data centers, that will not be possible.
You know, there was one council member who voted against the moratorium. There was almost two. Brandy Anderson said she was a no vote, but agreed to sort of go with the flow for the process of it. I think she may end up having a perhaps different vote depending on what they do down the road. But Kathleen Taylor was the only person who voted against the moratorium. She said it was a signal to business that is going to be unhealthy for the community because it's going to not encourage businesses to set up their data centers in Reno. She's obviously very pro-business and very pro-data centers. So she did vote against the moratorium, and I'm assuming we'll probably hear more about that in the very near future.
And, you know, Governor Joe Lombardo actually just had a speech where he talked about the fact that he is also all in on data centers. He thinks that data centers are one of the solutions to Nevada's financial problems, that we need to offer incentives and have more data centers coming to the state. And, you know, I don't think that these businesses that are making tons of money need to have taxpayer incentives to relocate here so that they can then, you know, use the power and the water and resources. It's to me, I don't want data centers to become the next industry that follows mining and gaming in terms of fun industries that take advantage of our state.
You know, when you look at the Great Basin and that vast expanse of land, I could see why people would want to look at this region for data center development, particularly in our neighboring county. And it's happening.
It is.
Speaking of artificial intelligence, sort of, I think the nexus between data centers and artificial intelligence is not as tight as people would like to assume. But we were told recently, Kristen, to stop using AI.
I guess I'll throw my phone out.
I was flabbergasted by this comment. Well, first of all, it came because we disclose on the articles that we use AI to help us write. We disclose that, which nobody else is doing that I've been able to tell in this market. So for trying to be transparent and ethical, we got criticized for using AI tech for our publication. And I have to say that we've been using AI since the day This Is Reno was born in 2009, and there's absolutely no way around using AI as a digital news publication. That is impossible. And I think it comes down to a fundamental lack of understanding about what artificial intelligence is. I almost said alternative intelligence. That would be a great name for a band. Alternative intelligence. AI is, as a concept, has been around for nearly 100 years and has been sort of enacted or become a thing more prominently in about, I guess, the past probably 30 or 40 or 50 years. I remember first hearing the term artificial intelligence when I was a lowly undergrad, and I was reading this magazine called Mondo 2000. Did you ever read that?
No.
It was more of a Bay Area thing. I don't think there was probably hardly ever copies in Reno, maybe at Borders or whatever bookstores we had back in the day, but they were always hopping about AI back then. And then, of course, as Google and AOL came online, people got to experience and enjoy AI tech directly. And I don't think people quite understand that AI is everywhere online. I mean, it's your Roomba, your little mobile vacuums are driven by AI, Google. And where this comment was made was on Facebook is heavily AI driven, and it's going to be even more so driven by AI, particularly as they're firing thousands of employees right now, as we're told. And so AI is everywhere. I mean, you know, Netflix, all those algorithms that drive, what your favorite Netflix show is, that's all AI. And I don't think people quite understand that. So there's no way around using AI if you're using any kind of digital technology. Your smartphone has it. Your smartphone apps all probably use it to some degree. Our content management system just switched to AI tech. Our phones, it's on our phones now.
What do you think Siri is and Alexa?
Exactly. Yeah, those things that talk back to us is all AI. Angry Birds, Words with Friends. I know I'm dating myself here in Facebook years, but those are all AI-driven apps or platforms or whatever. So if you tell a digital news publication to stop using AI, you may as well just tell us to stop publishing, which, by the way, if you give us the right amount of money, we will do that. We've had that conversation recently in the past 6 months. And well, we have a growth plan. Let's just put it that way. We'll put that up online one of these days and people can see it for themselves. If people are actually aware of what AI really is and they understand that they're probably using it a lot, they have to admit that they're pretty reliant on it. And so I don't want that reality to be confused with your ability to oppose or not oppose, let's say, a data center in your backyard. I think those are two kind of different issues. It's sort of like you can be opposed to massive consumption of fossil fuels and still drive a vehicle. I mean, you're not being a hypocrite by doing that because we all have to drive a vehicle that we can afford. So anyway, you can't escape AI. And I think what we're really seeing is really the super fast advancement of generative AI. And that's what's really fueling these data centers. Would you agree with that, Kristen?
I think so. Absolutely. I think it's the generative AI. And I think it's the more large scale corporate, these big companies that are basically using AI to run so many functions. I don't think that the average ChatGPT search is causing the data center explosion. It's a much bigger picture than that. Yeah. And I think if people understood a little bit more about how we're using AI, I mean, I would love if people ask us questions about how we use it, I'd love to share it. I actually did a webinar for my other job several months ago talking about AI and how I use that. And I think one of the things that I find—
You spoke in my class last fall on it too.
Yeah.
I hope you'll come back this coming fall.
One of the things that's most helpful is that we can use AI to transcribe these, 6, 7, 8 hour meetings that we cover and find the quotes, use that transcription to pull the quotes and actually get the quotes accurate
And
in
to be
less
able to
time.
fact check them quicker.
Yes, we can fact check things quicker. We can be more accurate, and that is a huge help. That shaves a lot of time. Having to hand transcribe meetings because the governing bodies won't put transcripts of their meetings attached to their YouTubes like they used to, and so we have to do that on our own. And AI is a huge help for that. So I think I'd love, if people have questions about how we're using AI, ask it, but don't bash it without knowing really what's going on.
Yeah, and just to be upfront about this, we're going to be using more AI in the future and not less for our publication. And we actually have another project we may launch this summer. It's going to be heavily AI driven, so the community can look forward to that. And I think the immediate direct benefit is we've been publishing for quite some time now, meeting advance notices using AI to basically take an agenda or a meeting packet and distill that down into a readable news story so that people can get the key points in advance of the meeting. We publish those outside of our registration wall. We publish those outside of our paywall because it is a pretty small lift for us to do those because of AI. And it also keeps the community informed. So we're publishing, I would say, anywhere from maybe 3 to 7 stories a week, free stories extra, that we would not be doing otherwise.
And I think
because of AI.
Another point to make is that everything that goes through that goes onto the website, whether it's generated by a person or by AI, is reviewed by a person and edited. I mean, we don't take those AI results and just willy-nilly paste them to the site or feed them in and publish and go. We read everything and edit everything.
Kristen, would you also agree? I think our errors have gone down because of AI. We've had a couple blunders. I believe one time, and I think we mentioned this on a previous episode, we published a meeting packet where the AI took the meeting minutes from the prior meeting and put that into this is what's coming up next. So that was one blunder. It was very quickly fixed and corrected. But by and large, I think our error rate has gone down because of AI.
Yes. And I think that we haven't had those blunders like the AI news slop sites that actually publish stories about meetings that have yet to happen.
Yes. And those crappy AI generated images. I think we've published
terrible.
1 or 2 of those, and
only
we,
one
of
or
course,
two
disclosed it. And only because in one case it was so funny. I thought it added to the story. But I see other websites publishing all their images like that. And to me, that's kind of lazy. It's signaling that you don't want to invest in the community to hire somebody or go out yourself and take images of, let's say, the outside of City Hall to let people know that this is where this meeting is occurring. So I am opposed to it on that level, but I think by and large, the way we use it, if we disclose it properly, I think is basically okay. I'm sure some people are going to disagree, but I know of entire, let's say, Substacks that I know almost for certain are being AI written, that are being published under somebody's name. And frankly, I think that's where we're going as far as communications, written communications, is that if you can do something with AI in seconds that it would have taken hours, if not days to write in the past, that's the reality we live in. I mean, it puts people like you and I at a disadvantage who we like to write, and we're also faced with the fact that people don't like to read. So they want their 2-minute video to get the angry issue out front.
Yeah.
And
and it's
that
not
rage bait,
It's not just that they don't want to read, it's that they don't want to pay for the news.
There's that too. Yeah. So, I mean, in fairness, AI could put us out of business.
Yes.
So, I mean.
Well, and speaking of that, last week I joined a podcast that was recording A Seat at the Table with Greg Kidd. He's running
for CD2.
Yeah, CD2. And
who
he
has
has
been an advertiser with us too. We should disclose that.
Yes. And he was doing an episode on news deserts. And normally we don't hop on a lot of other people's podcasts, but we love to talk about news deserts because Northern Nevada is a news desert, and there are more and more news deserts being created. And we think that that's an important issue to talk about. So if you are listening to podcasts and you catch a seat at the table with Greg Kidd, check out the episode that I am on, talking a little bit about what's going on with news media these days.
Is it out yet?
I don't believe so.
I have not heard it. And
Neither
I don't even
have
know what you said.
Hopefully it's good.
If there are any other candidates for office or people soon to, not be a candidate for office that want to do a podcast on news deserts or similar issues, by all means, hit us up. We would love to do it. Did you get paid $1 million to be on that podcast, Kristen?
I got paid nothing, but it was a great conversation. Yeah, it was a great conversation. I got paid nothing, but I got to talk.
By the way, it's not the first time we've been asked by a politician to be interviewed. I got that offer a couple of years ago. I accepted and it never materialized, but I was going to be grilled by a local politician on a podcast at one point. So it's not unheard of for us, but who knows? Give us your feedback. Drop some comments below if you have questions about those issues or concerns. Kristen, I think we've got time for maybe one more item. Should we talk about speaking of the election, the new voting warehouse?
Yeah. So this
is kind of interesting.
There's a big old new warehouse. The county decided that the space at 9th Street was just not big enough to accommodate the Registrar of Voters office anymore. I think they had
it's probably security issues too.
Yeah, equipment and storage places in like 2 or 3 different places. And so staff was having to drive to different locations to get different things. And yeah, there's security issues when you have to have 3 different areas that are secure. And so they got a warehouse down on Longley, and everything is consolidated. They have another phase of work that they're going to be doing, but for now, they have all of the equipment in one place. They have ample room for people to come and, look at, watch the counting, watch ballot sorting or what have you. There's more gallery space. I think there were a lot of complaints last election that there wasn't enough room for everybody who wanted to literally watch people sort paper. Even though they've had surveillance video kind of streaming online for that as well, but people want to go down and actually watch it in person. And so there's more room for that. I think there's more security. And then this week they are testing all of the equipment. They're getting used to all of the iPads and really going into full steam for the primary election coming up on June 9th.
I wonder what kind of conspiracies are going to come out of this facility. Do you remember, was it 2 years ago or 4 years ago where the live stream went down like late at night and people were like, that's when the fraud happened?
Yeah. I'm sure that somebody's going to come up with something. That is the one constant that I have heard in every election conversation, everything that they do with the Registrar of Voters office. It's never enough. There's always somebody that's going to complain that there's a cover up, that it's election fraud, and that, they're mishandling everything. It's never enough. And so I think that those people are in the minority. There are very few of them. I think as a whole, people trust the elections. And so hopefully we don't have any sort of absolute. I mean, I think I've heard mayhem already. People are concerned about scanning a QR code to get their sample ballot, and there's confusion with that.
It was weird. I will admit it was weird. Some of the sample ballot stuff was really weird. But guess what? Your ballot is very easy to understand. You use a black pen, fill in the little circles, go down the line, sign your name on the outside, put it in the thing, put it in your box, and the postal person will pick it up and you voted. That's all you got to do. It's really not that hard.
No. And if you go down to vote, I mean, there's people there who can show you what to do.
It shouldn't be. It's not complicated, nor should it be. If you've been on this planet for a while, it's pretty easy to figure out. And I'm still baffled by the people who say, well, my ballot was never processed. Well, you can go online and check that too.
Yeah, they're actually going to have, I think, real-time notification that your ballot has been processed. So once you turn it in, there's going to be a real-time dashboard that shows your ballot has been accepted.
I think in most of these cases, it's user error. They moved, they forgot to update their address. They want to blame the government for something. There you go. There's a convenient thing. Yeah. I got dropped off the list. I got switched to a Dem or whatever. Well, go online and fix that. I mean, it's really not that hard. I didn't even vote for quite some time, but every time I voted, there's been no doubt in my mind my vote was tallied. It was accurate. I mean, these people are professionals at this. They're not wackadoodles.
Yeah.
Sitting around reading stuff online and getting upset. Oh, my goodness. Well, do we want to cover one more item?
Sure. Go for it.
Okay. So I got another one that I kind of called us out a little bit. About the DA's race. One person contacted me, not some. There was just one that said the media has not been doing their job with respect to Sparks City Attorney Wes Duncan and the DA's race. And I'm just going to read a part of this email to be fair, and then I'm going to have my response to it. Media has done little to examine his city attorney record or ask what his no-issue rate is. His office issued release after release that highlights a long sentence, always almost followed by the words suspended sentence. The plea itself results in the minimum of only 2 days of jail for any actual time, despite the law allowing for up to 6 months, so on and so forth. And this seems like an oversight in the media's attention to not be covering this. Also citing FBI numbers that are being referenced in stories about crime being up or down are in fact the same as the state numbers. I believe that's because they use the same numbers. And each agency that reports crime stats to the FBI and other statistics sends its information to the state. Well, yeah, that would be why they use that. And so on. The point being is that we have not looked skeptically at this with respect to Wes Duncan, the Sparks City attorney. And I guess my response to that is twofold. One is that's the same kind of information we get from the DA's office currently, almost weekly, which is their wins, not their losses.
Not the cases that they drop or refuse to prosecute.
That too. So that's already happening. So if we're going to look skeptically at that issue, it's going to come on both sides. My second point in response to this is if everything that this person is concerned about is saying is true, that nowhere near compares to a DA who has a wife working under the person that reports to him who is an at-will employee. That is comparatively insane. Not talking about your crime rates.
Yeah.
In a comprehensive manner is nowhere near the same as a nepotism issue.
Well, and I think, another thing to point out is that city attorneys' offices, they prosecute misdemeanors. They don't prosecute the felonies. Yeah. And so, a suspended sentence or a 2-day jail time could be perfectly reasonable for whatever misdemeanor that is based on the person's, situation. They're not giving a 2-day jail sentence for someone who carjacked someone.
And not only that, but even the current DA has said that he's not happy with what he calls the lack of truth in sentencing, which is an issue he does not control. That means if someone, let's say, gets convicted for something and sentenced to a 10-year sentence, may only serve a year in prison, for example. I mean, this is kind of pulling these numbers out of my head, but that's the reality of criminal prosecutions in Nevada. And I believe the DA already made his case about that a couple years ago in an op-ed or something. So thanks to him for illuminating that as an issue. which I then think kind of negates this whole inquiry that we're not looking at things skeptically enough because we didn't go after Wes Duncan for doing the same thing. I don't know. I feel like we can't win sometimes, Kristen.
No, we cannot. But we can keep trying.
And that's, again, I think a consequence of not understanding how journalism works. But that's what we do and why we're here. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.